We look at key positional battles and players to watch for the Baltimore Ravens throughout their mandatory minicamp. All that and more come up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your podcast. So audio form, video form, it's the same show. You're not missing out on any content here, regardless of how you like to watch or listen to our show. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make everyone want more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Again, 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, Monday through Friday, Ravens news, analysis, updates, and so much more, even in the lull periods of the offseason. But we have mandatory minicamp kicking off for the Ravens today, running through essentially the rest of the week. And there are plenty of not only positional battles to watch, but players in those positional battles, obviously, to watch. So I wanted to talk about what to watch throughout the entire course of minicamp. There's a lot to dive into. We'll talk about, so we'll just go offensively and then defensively. So we'll go offense in the first segment, defense in the second segment. Not too complicated there. And then we'll get into a couple of Ravens storylines, including Lamar Jackson and some other just Ravens news, notes, and quotes in general to get everybody up to speed before we head into a couple of days of minicamp here. So let's just dive right into it. Minicamp positional battles for the Ravens. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball here. And starting at the quarterback position, I know that there's not really a ton to talk about there, considering, look, Lamar Jackson is this team's starter. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But the backup quarterback position is now one that is a little bit intriguing to me. And this is going to be a battle. Minicamp, obviously, the whole takeaways thing, what can you take away from minicamp? Obviously, once you get to training camp with the pads, that's when you can take away a little bit more. But this is where the positional battles start for me, right? It's mandatory minicamp, first of all, which means that barring anything crazy, every player is expected to be there, meaning that we're going to get some – this is the beginning of those battles. Backup quarterback between Josh Johnson and Devin Leary. Going to be interesting to see how that works. Now, seems like Josh Johnson is going to win that job. Devin Leary, sixth-round rookie out of Kentucky. Josh Johnson, the journeyman veteran, who is actually, he's been in Baltimore a decent amount of time considering how his career has played out and all the stops he's been at. But seems like the Ravens really like Devin Leary, at least the potential he has in terms of his arm strength and some of the other traits he possesses. But again, I do expect this to pretty easily go to Josh Johnson, but there is going to be that element of competition, and I'm intrigued to see what Devin Leary can show, not only through minicamp, but obviously once we get to training camp, the preseason, because I feel like they might view him as a long-term option, and they used that sixth-round pick on him. He wasn't a guy that I had on my radar personally for the Ravens, but feels like there are a lot of things that Baltimore likes about him. Now, in the running back department, there's honestly not a ton. I mean, obviously a player to watch is Derrick Henry, but I think honestly all the guys in that room are. Justice Hill competing for snaps in that backfield, especially before Keaton Mitchell comes back, but he'll still have a role after. There's no doubt about that. But Rasheen Ali, right? What is he going to look like throughout minicamp? He obviously was dealing with an injury, but feels like he's ramping up and should be good to go. I think that's at least what I remember reading about and just figuring out. So Rasheen Ali is someone who Baltimore might have to lean on a little bit before Keaton Mitchell comes back. Once Mitchell comes back, obviously it's, he's probably going to be a game day inactive, or if they want to use him on special teams, they could. But for me, the running back position, it's not a ton of intrigue. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There is intrigue, but in terms of positional battles, right? Who's going to battle it out? Derrick Henry is going to be the bell cow running back. There's no question about that. It's more about how is it going to look when Keaton Mitchell comes back, and what does that backfield look like in terms of how the carries are split behind Derrick Henry, and how much of a workhorse is Derrick Henry going to be this season. Now, in the wide receiver department, this one is super intriguing to me for multiple different reasons. We talked yesterday about Malik Cunningham and Tez Walker and guys who stood out during OTAs. Well, look, those guys are going to be competing for Tez Walker has a roster spot. For example, Cunningham is going to be competing for a roster spot. You have undrafted rookies, Kadir Ismail, the son of Kadri Ismail, and a couple of other guys as well, who Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have taken under their wings. I would assume they're going to be 6 wide receiver spots. I've been pretty consistent in saying that. And, we're not going to know until the roster comes out. But let's just assume there's 6 wide receiver spots. If you're an everydayer on this show, you've heard me say this a ton. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Tez Walker, Nelson Aguilar, Deontay Hardy. Those 5 to me are locks. So that 6th wide receiver spot, if you're keeping 6, right now it's Tylan Wallace who's the favorite. I'm really intrigued about Tylan Wallace. I'm a big Tylan Wallace guy. I think he hasn't gotten a relative shot to be on the field as a receiver for the Ravens over the course of his career so far. And this is going to be a pretty big make or break camp, minicamp, training camp, preseason. Going to be a really big couple months for Tylan Wallace because Malik Cunningham has been getting rave reviews coming out of OTAs, has made the transition from quarterback to wide receiver pretty seamlessly, it feels like. So if Cunningham is able to beat out Tylan Wallace, I just don't see with this offense them keeping 7 wide receivers. I mean, look, they could. Anything is possible, but I would bet more on them keeping 5 than keeping 7, but I think to me 6 is the one. So there are going to be a bunch of wide receivers essentially if they keep 6 competing for 1 spot, and that's one of the most intriguing positional battles in all of minicamp for me as we move into it. Now, tight end, you got to watch Isaiah Likely, I feel like. He's a player to watch, but there's no really positional battle going on here. Mark Andrews is your 1. Isaiah Likely is your 2. And then, obviously, Charlie Kolar is your 3. I don't anticipate there being any massive positional battles there. Obviously, Kolar's another player to watch, too, just in terms of what his role could be this season. Because I think, again, the big storyline in that tight end room is, all right. How are you going to use Isaiah Likely? How are the Ravens going to use Isaiah Likely with Mark Andrews? But Charlie Kolar is, I think, going a little under the radar here in terms of what his potential role could be. Storyline number 1 is using Isaiah Likely, but storyline number 2 is can you use Charlie Kolar in 3 tight end sets effectively as well? How often are they going to use those 3 tight end sets? So that one is, I feel like tight end, we all know that this passing offense, it does run through tight ends. Now, not to the extent that it did in a Greg Roman. I think we're going to see more wide receiver involvement this year. In fact, I think we have to if this team wants to get to where they want to go. But tight ends are going to be the name of the game again this year. Andrews is going to be Lamar's guy, but for Likely and Kolar, what does that mean for them? That's a key storyline. And again, it's not a positional battle, but it's just something to keep an eye on there. But the offensive line is going to be huge. Multiple guys competing for multiple spots on the offensive line. The storyline being Baltimore losing 3 starting offensive linemen this offseason in John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler, and Morgan Moses. So, the house favorites right now, right, you would assume, left to right, the offensive line would be Ronnie Stanley, who's returning. You got Andrew Voorhees, who seems to be the favorite for that left guard job right now. Tyler Linderbaum at center, no surprise there. And then you have probably Ben Cleveland at right guard, filling in for Kevin Zeitler. And then Morgan Moses seems like that role, the favorite's Roger Rosengard. Now, again, nothing set in stone. The only 2 set in stone there, it's Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum. But you have other guys too, right? Daniel Faalele is going to be a player who we talked about on our rises and fallers yesterday for OTAs, who by all accounts was strong to start and then really fell off at the end and was having trouble with conditioning. He was tired, gassed. So Faalele, that doesn't mean that since he had a struggle to OTAs at the end there, it doesn't mean he's out of the competition. There's going to be that competition between Roger Rosengarten and Daniel Faalele for that right tackle spot. On the interior, they signed Josh Jones. Salah's still going to be a member of that competition too. It's not like these guys have it all wrapped up and that's that. And this is what the Ravens offensive line is going to be left to right. And there's no competition there. The offensive line to me is, I talked about wide receiver and how that's, super intriguing to me. I think the offensive line is probably the most important positional battle here we have to watch. And that will probably be the same trend going into training camp as well. But some of these guys in minicamp, how do they respond? What is it going to be like for them? And again, there are no pads here. There's not a ton of especially for the offensive line, right? Like it's very hard to gauge offensive line without pads on, like up in the trenches. We'll talk about it with defensive line in the second part of the show. It's very hard to gauge that without pads. So we're not going to really know who's quote unquote like performing super duper well until we get to that point. But there are still things you can take away in terms of certain footworks, in terms of hand placement, right? There are still some things you can take away, but we're not fully to the, oh, okay, let's just take away everything. That I think will be jumping to conclusions a little bit. But there are a lot of guys competing for, look, a good amount of spots in that line, right? Over half of the offensive line is up for grabs now. Again, you have your house favorites, Voorhees, Cleveland, and Rosengarten, but there are still going to be other opportunities. And even Patrick McCary is going to be in that conversation too, right? I think that the Ravens, they love vets. They love vets. And so if you go with Rosengarten, Voorhees, Cleveland, that's a young offensive line. And I think I did mention it on yesterday's show, where we saw back in 2020 or 2021, everybody thought a young Tyree Phillips was going to win the starting right guard job for the Ravens, and he was the guy. And then they surprise everybody and go with DJ Fluker because essentially he was a vet. So they've done it before, but I would expect it to be Voorhees, Cleveland, and Rosengarten to win those jobs. But again, they have to win those jobs. In minicamp, with everybody there, it's going to be the first opportunity for them to get ahead in that competition, or at least further ahead in that competition. Coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking about the defensive side of the ball, positional battles, and players to watch for the Ravens throughout the entirety of mandatory minicamp. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on the show. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals, MVP, to who's going to hit one out of the park. So, Gunnar Henderson, talk about MVP. He is firmly in that MVP race, and among a bunch of other guys right now. Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, so the list goes on there. But if you want to bet MVP, MLB over on FanDuel, you can do that. Speaking of the NBA Finals, Boston Celtics up 2-0 over the Dallas Mavericks. So Mavericks going to be looking to come back, but if you want early action on that Finals MVP, you can do it over on FanDuel. Plus NFL for the Ravens, they opened up on FanDuel against the Kansas City Chiefs at about 2.5-point underdogs. So if you want to bet on that line, it should be moving over the next couple of months. You can do that over on FanDuel as well. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big one to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Taco Tuesday. Again, really appreciate everybody for being here today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day here. Free and available, of course, still all podcasting platforms. So if you like to watch, like to listen, video form, audio form, we're here for you 5 days per week. In the off season, even, I mean, it's every single weekday, Monday through Friday. We're here for you. I've been a host of the show for almost 5 years now, coming up in August, and I have not missed a single weekday episode. So if you want Ravens content, we have you covered. You don't have to worry about that over here on this show. Also, be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today over on the Locked On Podcast Network. Here, your team every day. Peter Bukowski brings you the best coverage of the sports world across all sports. So be sure to check Peter out here on Locked On Sports Today. But let's now move into the defensive side of the ball, positional battles, and players to watch for the Ravens over the course of minicamp. Let's start with the defensive line. Let's just go every position through here. Defensive line, you look at this room, this is probably my favorite group on the entire roster. It honestly has been for a couple of years now. Baltimore is it's the perfect balance of everything to me. You have the vets, Michael Pierce, Brent Urban. You have really talented young players, Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington. I would assume that's going to be what the room looks like. Now, to me, it's not necessarily about positional battles for roster spots at that point. I think to me it's positional battle for role, because I expect Travis Jones to take a huge leap this year. I expect he's my early pick for Ravens breakout player of the year, especially if he's able to take on a bigger role in this defense. Now, I feel like that's going to be a competition between, okay, who gets snaps between Travis Jones and Broderick Washington? Is Michael Pierce going to, and look, Pierce was, to me, probably the most underrated Raven last season, and that can go to a lot of different players, but I thought Michael Pierce was so good for them last season, and he's kind of that guy, who'll eat up double teams, run stuffer, has some juice as a pass rusher. I think Pierce should still be a big part of what they do, but Travis Jones, to me, he's an incredible two-way player. He's a great run stuffer, and he has extreme pop as a pass rusher. That's going to be what I'm looking for. Travis Jones, what can he do against some of these guys? And again, when I'm talking about against these guys, it's healthy competition, right? Tez Walker and TJ Tampa, we talked about that at OTAs, them having that healthy competition against each other. Tez Walker wins some reps, TJ Tampa wins some reps. It's about getting better and pushing everybody. It's not about, pitting all these guys against each other in these battles. It's about, hey, who's going to take this, and then just supporting everybody from there. So I expect there to be some positional battle in that defensive line room, but it's not about who's going to make the roster. It's about, okay, where are these snaps going to go? Where are these snaps getting allocated across the defensive line? Because there is so much talent in that room, both veteran and young talent. But, there are only so many spots to go around there. Plus, if you want to use some of these bigger outside linebackers on the interior, that's going to take away from some of those guys as well. But I'm so excited. I mean, obviously for Justin Madubuike too, right? Like, that's a given. And I'm so excited for Travis Jones and what he's going to do this season, because I have very, very, very high expectations for Travis Jones this season. Now, speaking of the outside linebackers, let's just go there right now, because I do think there are some snaps up for grabs, especially after Jadeveon Clowney leaves. It's going to be a big year for the younger players in that room. So Odafe Owe, Tavius Robinson, David Ajabo. I know that Ajabo is probably not going to be ready until training camp in terms of pure 100% drills or whatever, or even just drills in general. But when you talk about, okay, is Adisa Isaac going to be back? What can he show? For a guy like Tavius Robinson, who apparently did have a very strong OTA period and was still, working through things, who had more of a role than I thought. I'll always say it. Tavius Robinson blew me away, one, by the snaps he played, and two, how he played in those snaps. He impressed me last season, and apparently he is building off that momentum, but can you continue to build off of that momentum, especially during minicamp? So I'm looking at Tavius Robinson to see what's going on with him. But for Odafe Owe, right, how does he look? Because when you're talking about players to watch, it's okay. For some of these guys who are expected to take on bigger roles, like obviously you want to go back to wide receiver. Yeah, Rashad Bateman's a pretty big player to watch in minicamp, isn't he? I mean, we're going to talk about it in training camp too, but Bateman, all eyes are going to be on Bateman, the number 2 wide receiver. He and Owe, right, same draft class, just a couple picks apart. 5th-year option for Owe gets picked up. Bateman signs the extension as a 5th-year, the whole debacle with that thing happened, and he had to sign the extension, or, the whole thing happened. But for Owe, he's essentially going to come in here. If you're not viewing Kyle Van Noy as this team's number 1 pass rusher, it is Odafe Owe, and there are no questions. Owe has been fine for the Ravens, but he hasn't had that full leap, that full, Justin Madubuike type breakout. A lot of people are expecting that this season for Odafe Owe, or at least something close to it. And they're going to need it, especially because Clowney is now out the door. But it also means, yes, for Tavius Robinson, it's going to be big. Kyle Van Noy, look, he's not a player to watch, in my opinion. I think we all know what Kyle Van Noy brings to the table. This is more about the young guys in this room for me. But again, you have to have other guys step up with some of these veterans departing. And speaking of, Patrick Queen goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, so a huge player to watch for me is Trenton Simpson. He is up there, players to watch for me. Him next to Roquan, hopefully will be able to replicate the success that Patrick Queen had next to him. Now, we're going to have to get used to Trenton Simpson at number 23, Rocky Ya-Sin jersey. So if you see a 23, it is not Rocky Ya-Sin moving around there. It is Trenton Simpson. He switches from 30 to 23 in the offseason. So I guess that's a storyline. Not really. We had to go through all those number switches a couple of years ago when they first introduced the single-digit numbers to everybody. 23 looks, it's an interesting choice for a linebacker, but you know what? It's fine. I don't really have any issues with it. I know some people love the unconventional numbers, other people don't. I really don't think it's that big of a deal. But Simpson is a player with the sideline-to-sideline speed. We saw what he could do in Week 18 against the Steelers. The Ravens aren't necessarily married to having another inside linebacker on the field next to Roquan Smith this year. They're just not. With Queen, you couldn't take him off the field with Roquan because those two played so well off of each other. Now, Trenton Simpson can get there, right? He can get to that level where it's like, okay, why would you take him off the field? And I think by the end of the year, there's a pretty good shot that will probably happen. But they can use more dime safety looks. They can use more multiple DB rotations and only have Roquan on the field plus these other guys. So Trenton Simpson is going to have to establish a name here for himself early and often. But another guy I'm watching is Malik Harrison, because I predict maybe there might be some sort of split between Simpson and Harrison to start the season, maybe even Chris Board if you want to get spicy with it. So I'm intrigued to see how that all works out. Moving into the secondary. Secondary is huge for me in terms of young guys. We talked about a lot of these risers from OTAs, Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, those guys who have been pretty injury prone over the course of their first couple years with the Ravens. Apparently, multiple big plays during OTAs, looked good during OTAs. Can they continue that momentum during minicamp? Also, obviously, the big ones is the rookies, right? Nate Wiggins and TJ Tampa. How do those guys look? I'm not, it's interesting because the way this Ravens cornerback room looks now, they have depth, both vets and young guys. You can never have enough corner depth, obviously, but for Wiggins and Tampa, how do they look in their first mini camps? All eyes are going to be on them as rookies. But to me, a player to watch here is Marlon Humphrey. John Harbaugh took the podium, talked about how, there was I guess, it seemed like there was just uncertainty about Marlon's status and whether he was going to be full go or not for minicamp. I think we're going to learn a little bit about his situation starting today and then moving forward to the rest of the week. I don't really know what that looks like. It was pretty vague, but that's a guy I'm watching just to see what the situation is. Marlon was not healthy at the end of the year last year. He dealt with injuries for most of the season and, ended up having to not be 100% healthy. He wasn't 100% healthy during that AFC Championship game. So Marlon's a guy I'm watching. Now, in that safety room, Ardarius Washington is someone I'm watching closely because it seems like he has taken over the lead for the third safety job right now. Sanusi Kane had a great OTA period, so I'm going to be curious to see how he looks. You also have Bo Braid potentially coming back from that ankle. How is he going to look? So the Ravens safety depth, right? Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, no concerns, no battles, they're those guys. We don't have to worry about that. For the safety depth, guys have to step up to replace Geno Stone. That's where I am looking there. So a lot of positional battles, a lot of players to watch throughout minicamp is going to be exciting to see. We're, again, getting one step closer to the Ravens season. Really exciting stuff. Coming up in the final part of the show, though, we'll talk about some Ravens storylines, Lamar Jackson, and some other quick Ravens news, notes, and quotes. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on the show. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Tuesday again. As always, really appreciate everybody for tuning in today and every day, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, whether you're an everyday or you listen every single day here to this show. Really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying what you're listening to or watching, whether you're in audio form or video form. Really appreciate you checking out the show. And if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back in. We're actually, at the time of this recording, I think we're less than 10 subscribers away from 7,000. That's another huge milestone once we hit it. So the communities we've built up, it's blown me away. Audio form, we started off. Video form, obviously, we added a couple years later alongside audio form. The social media has been incredible. Actually, I'm once again trying to start up the Instagram. So if you want to follow me there, and on Twitter too, of course, at ChaosStriker34, I'd really appreciate that. And then obviously subtext, where you can get exclusive text updates from me over there. Really appreciate that as well. Let's talk about a couple of Ravens storylines here in this final part of the show. Lamar Jackson, his name just seems to never be out of the media, and seems like it's always in the media, in all these storylines, and everybody's always talking about Lamar. Well, Chris Sims put out his top 40 quarterback list, and look, I will preface this by saying this list is a lot better than what we saw from Nick Wright, who had Lamar not even in his top 5. Chris Sims does have Lamar in his top 5. He has him at number 4 in the damn okay category. It's Lamar Jackson, Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert, 4, 5, 6. So Lamar comes in at 4. Then you have number 2 and 3. It's Josh Allen, Joe Burrow at 2, 3, labeled the unicorns, and then legendary Patrick Mahomes at number 1. No surprise there. To me, look, I'm glad Chris Sims has Lamar in his top 5. I think that's a start. But when you talk about the word unicorn, whose name gets associated with that? Whose play style has been called a unicorn type play style? The uniqueness of him, how he goes about things. He is considered the super unique player and the super unique guy. He's been called a unicorn. Joe Burrow, I think, Josh Allen in this category, sure. Like Josh Allen, his play style is a bit unconventional, this, that, and the other. But Lamar's play style to most is like the most unconventional in the league. And everybody say, oh, well, he's this unconventional guy. And it's working for Lamar, right? It's working. So people call him a unicorn. But the thing here is Joe Burrow being in this unicorn category, Joe Burrow's play style is not unique, right? Joe Burrow, he's a great quarterback, right? Give Joe Burrow his flowers. He's in that top quarterback conversation, top 5 quarterback conversation. But to me, it's like to put Lamar in just, he's like, oh, okay, all right, cool, like top 5. But then Joe Burrow's labeled as a unicorn. Lamar's game is so much more of a unicorn, unique like game than Joe Burrow. I don't really know. I don't really know where that comes into play, because with Lamar, he's a dual threat quarterback. Josh Allen, a dual threat quarterback. Joe Burrow has a rushing element to him. He has that, but it's not to the level of Lamar or Josh Allen. So I would put Lamar and Josh Allen in that unicorn category, and then Joe Burrow probably in the damn okay category if I'm Chris Sims. But again, this is the time of quarterback lists. It's the time of, talking about things, to come up with stuff and talk about things. So I get it, but I wanted to acknowledge that in particular, where, again, I think in some way, shape, or form, everybody's going to have the 2, 3, 4 in any order of Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and a bunch. We could see Lamar at 4, Lamar at 2, Lamar at 3, and then all those other guys listed at 2, 3, 4, whatever. Seems like there's a consensus that those 3 are the 2, 3, 4, whatever order you want to put them in. But when you talk about categories, having Josh Allen and Joe Burrow in the second tier and then Lamar in the third tier, I mean, if anything, just put Lamar at 4 in the unicorn category. If anything, right? I'd still have Lamar higher, but to knock Lamar down a tier, I'm just like, that's a little interesting, because I think Lamar deserves to be more in the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow tier than in the Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert tier. So that's just my opinion with that. The Ravens also had their media day yesterday, so gearing up. I think all teams actually did, but of course, the Ravens, they had some interesting stuff going on social media. They had these like doppelgangers for Lamar Jackson, Roquan Smith, Justin Madubuike. Like, there are all these funny videos that came out and funny pictures that came out of these guys, and the number 8 jersey, 92-0. And actually, they got like Lamar to take a picture with the guy, and then Roquan took a picture with his guy. It was very funny. I don't know what they were doing there. I don't know what they were being used for or whatever, but I think we're going to be seeing those pictures for a very long time moving forward. And then I think, just the excitement for mandatory minicamp here is, as I say, and I said it earlier in the show, we are getting step by step closer and closer to the Ravens being fully entrenched in their 2024 season, hopefully getting to a Super Bowl and winning it, but they have a long way to go. But this is the process. Getting in, working with the coaches and teammates and everything that goes on. So again, I'm not expecting anything crazy in terms of absences. The Ravens aren't going through a Lamar Jackson situation, a J.K. Dobbins situation like last year. Should be smooth sailing unless something crazy pops up. But at the end of the day, we're going to see, and we are going to be covering mandatory minicamp here on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to, again, like and subscribe on YouTube. Like and follow along, and subscribe over in audio form as well. So I have you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Come up tomorrow. We will, of course, have more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.